Recently, I finally had the opportunity to play a ton of top lane during this preseason. I've been playing it across all ELOs. I started a fresh account, so I played through Silver, Gold, Platinum, and I've been playing all throughout Diamond as well. So I've got just about every single rank worth of experience in the past few weeks. Personally, I think that top lane is a really solid role to carry from, especially if you know exactly what you're doing. This is going to be made even stronger by the fact that most top laners don't have any clue what they're doing. To ensure that you are not one of those clueless top laners, I'm going to give you 5 tips that nobody is talking about for top lane. Remember that the preseason is the best time for learning and improvement, so if you haven't already, then make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. Over at our website, we've got hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. So what are these 5 secretive tips that nobody is telling you about? Let's kick it off with a really simple one. This one's aim is to keep you from taking bad trades in the laning phase. But how can we ensure that we virtually never take a bad trade? That's impossible, right? Well, actually, it's not. Most of the time, you can ensure that about 80 to 90% of your trades can go in your favor, simply by making sure that you stop taking random trades and always trade on a minion advantage. Now, this tip is especially important in the early laning phase. This is the first 3 or so levels. So many times I will see people go for a level 1 or 2 trade, but they haven't taken care of a lot of the minion wave first. As a general rule of thumb, you want to ensure that the enemy has no melee minions left before you trade on the enemy laner. Why is this important though? Does this actually make a big difference? Well, unless you're playing a champion like Olaf or Trundle who can kill somebody at level 1, yes, it's a very big deal. This is for a reason that I guarantee that you're not taking into account at all. When you kill all of the melee creeps in a wave, it allows your minions to walk further up on that wave, which means when you trade with the enemy champion, even if they're playing further back on your wave, if they trade back with you, your ranged creeps, which deal the most damage out of any minions, will then aggro to the enemy champion, dealing damage to them. If you fail to clear the melee minions before going for a trade really early on in the game, you're going to be pulling aggro from their ranged creeps, and they won't be pulling aggro from your ranged creeps. That's going to be a huge damage differential. This is something that once you do start taking it into account, you will very quickly see the difference between the 2 styles of trading. Early in the game, clear the melee minions before going in for a trade, you'll take less damage and the enemy champion will take more. Remember that the game, and top lane especially, revolves around minions, so the more you know about them, the more you're going to know about the game. Next up, I want to cover freezing in depth because it is finally a viable strategy again. In Season 9, turret plates just gave way too much gold, and freezing was not very good because of that. You wanted to get as many plates as possible, but with the nerf to turret plates, it's a little bit better to freeze than it was before, and on top of that, you can summon multiple Rift Heralds to get those plates quickly. Freezing is a fantastic way to deny gold and EXP from the enemy laner, and we're going to cover that a little bit later on in the video, but for now, I just want to focus exactly how you want to be freezing at each point in the lane. You've probably heard the general rule of thumb that 3 extra minions in the enemy's wave means that that wave will freeze towards you. This is a pretty good general rule of thumb, but it's not entirely true. In order to understand how to make a good freeze happen, you need to make sure that it's first of all going to freeze in the first place, but second of all that the freeze isn't going to get out of control. The best way to do this is to make sure that they have just enough minions in the enemy wave to make sure that it freezes without it getting too big. This will allow you to trade into the enemy champion, and it'll still allow you to freeze. If the enemy's wave gets too big suddenly, it's going to be really difficult to trade into the enemy champion. You're going to have trouble keeping the freeze because it's going to turn into a slow push for the enemy team, and it might crash into your tower. So you always want to keep it at just enough minions. So how do we know exactly how many minions? First of all, we need to discard the 3 minion rule. It's a good number to remember for beginners, but you're going to have to understand it a little bit better if you want to be dominating your lane. Instead, I want you to picture the lane as a gradient. Closer to the enemy tower is lighter in this gradient, and closer to your tower is darker in this gradient. In the lighter parts of the lane, under the enemy's tower, there doesn't even need to be extra minions in the enemy's wave in order for you to create a freeze. It's just going to automatically freeze if there are an equal amount of minions. The darker the gradient gets, that is, the closer to your tower, the more minions are going to be required for the enemy's wave in order for you to keep that freeze. If it is just outside of your tower's range, you might need more than 3 minions in order to keep that freeze. Usually it's going to be around 4 or sometimes even 5 if it's a cannon wave. The more familiar you get with this gradient, the more you'll be able to tell whether or not something is going to freeze or if it's going to slow push immediately. In fact, you can get to the point where you don't even look at the amount of minions in the wave, and you just look at their health values instead. Knowing what the wave is going to do is always the first step when determining what your next plan is, whether you're going to create a freeze, a slow push, a neutral lane. You need to know what it is currently doing first. If you don't get this completely at first, don't worry, it's a very complex topic. It's going to take some time. Just try to start seeing the lane as a gradient and try to see what I'm talking about in your own games, and you'll slowly start to get the feel of it. Now, next up at number 3, we actually have something that goes hand in hand with freezing, which is something that's called aggressive posturing. Now, when I've been playing in each and every one of these elos, pretty much no matter who I play against, their posturing is all wrong. Posturing refers to a champion's exact positioning in a wave. Defensive posturing would be when you are playing in or behind your minion wave, whereas aggressive posturing is when you are playing in or behind the enemy minion wave. You're going to want to be in different places against certain champions. For example, playing against Illaoi, you're going to want to stand behind minions so she's not able to land that E on you. Now I want to talk about specifically aggressive posturing because this is something that when I see other people do it, they're always doing it wrong, and I don't see enough aggressive posturing. If you know that you win a 1v1 and you have proper warding, then you should be walking up in the enemy wave and zoning the enemy champion from any CS. Now, of course, just like any other type of posturing, you want to be walking back and forth in between your minions and the enemy minions. So when do you want to be walking up and when do you want to be walking back? You don't want to be walking up the entire time because this means you're going to be overextending. If you're at a point where you win trades, then anytime you can punish CS is when you should be walking up. Your goal here is just to zone from any CS. You don't necessarily need to use your abilities. If they don't go for the CS, then that's a win for you and you can just back off. If they do go for the CS, either with an auto attack or an ability, that means that is one auto attack or ability they can't use on you, which means you're going to win the trade even harder. This will allow you to perform a quick winning trade before walking back, dropping minion aggro, and playing a little bit more defensively while you're waiting for your cooldowns to come back. A lot of people aren't playing aggressive enough in the lane. They won't punish people for going for CS. Remember, the more comfortable you get with playing aggressive, the more frequently you're going to be able to take control of that laning phase, snag a lead for yourself, and transition that into a good mid game. This does not mean that you want to be exhibiting over-aggression though. This is actually very bad, and I have played against a lot of people who are doing this as well, so control your aggression. Anytime a new wave for the enemy comes to the lane, you need to back off and play in your minions so that you don't immediately draw aggro from those minions and take unnecessary damage. Remember, if it's super early on in the game, that removing those melee minions from the enemy's wave is going to be huge for you. It's going to allow you to trade so much more heavily. The other time that you're going to want to back off is if one of your wards die or if you don't have proper vision. Aggression can very easily turn to over-aggression, especially if you're playing the matchup blind. You want to know that the enemy jungler isn't in your lane before you walk up. Now next up at number 4, it's very short and very sweet, but also very, very important. You need to commit this to memory. Every 30 seconds, every time a new wave comes, you want to check what the wave is doing. A slow push can turn into a freeze for the enemy champion very quickly. Your hard push might not crash right away. Things can go wrong, so every 30 seconds, you want to make sure that the lane is still going the way you are intending it to go. if your freeze turns into a slow push, then realizing this right away is going to help you adjust quickly so you know exactly what you need to do. This will just allow you to react quicker to any given situation, and it'll make it so that you lose out on EXP for mismanaging the wave a lot less often. If you have to, then write this down on a notepad. I know it can be hard to remember to be looking for these things while you are in a game, but once you form the habit, you'll never want to go back. Speaking of EXP, we want to be making sure that we use minion management properly in order to build an EXP lead for ourselves. This is making sure that you don't miss any EXP and you deny any EXP that you can. The biggest key factor here is you need to make sure that you're not just auto-shoving. Whenever you're just hard shoving to the enemy tower over and over and over again, you're throwing your lead away. You need to be capitalizing on it. Remember that you can create EXP leads by using freezes in the early game, and you can use slow pushes in order to make sure that you don't miss a single minion of EXP when you're basing or roaming. Usually if you get a kill or two in lane, it would be pretty common to see you up a level, but what if I told you that just 1 or 2 kills can get you as much as a 3-level lead? Now completely mastering this is going to take a lot of work, so instead I'm just going to give you some basic rules so you can get started. Rule number 1 for building your EXP lead is stop auto-shoving. You don't want to default to hard shoving, you want to use slow pushes and freezes as well. Wait for the wave to crash and then determine what you want to do with that wave based on a few other things. So what things would we be looking for when creating a slow push? A slow push should be used for 3 reasons. The first reason is just to secure you a base or a roam timer. When you create a slow push, you're going to be crashing 2 waves into the enemy tower instead of 1, and this is going to do a few things. First of all, it's going to hold the enemy in the lane for a lot longer. If they were looking to base right after you based, they have to clear all of those minions first. All of your minions are going to be focusing the enemy tower. They won't be hitting other minions, which means the enemy's wave is not going to die. You won't miss any EXP for doing this. When the next waves meet, they will be closer to the enemy's tower while the enemy champion is basing. This means it's going to take them a whole lot of time to walk back to the lane, in which case their minions are going to be killing yours, you're going to already be in the lane, not missing any EXP, you just let their wave kill your wave. Their next wave is going to arrive sooner, it's going to create a freeze, and you're going to deny as much as a wave and a half of EXP just from doing this. So we use our slow push in order to create a good base timer for ourselves and an EXP lead while ensuring that we didn't miss any EXP. Now that we have this freeze that's resulting from the wave bouncing off the enemy tower, what do we do with the freeze to create an even bigger EXP lead? Here's where the aggressive posturing that we learned earlier in this video comes into play. You want to be standing in the enemy's wave and try to zone the enemy champion from EXP. Use that gradient technique that we learned earlier in the video in order to ensure that there aren't too many minions in the enemy wave during this freeze, so you can still win trades. Finally, every 30 seconds, make sure to check that it's still freezing, and if for some reason it broke, that's okay. Turn it into another slow push, get another base timer, go back, shop, and do it all again. I hope that by the end of this video, you can see how closely these things all tie in together, and you can see just how reliant on minions top lane is. Some of these topics are very complex, and they're going to be hard to master. That's okay, you can start with just one of them so you don't overwhelm yourself. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. As always, I'm Panther, I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.